Long ago, in an age veiled by myth and memory, an event unfolded that would echo through the corridors of time, not just a war, but the Trojan War. Born not on a battlefield, but at a wedding feast among gods and mortals, this epic would become the bedrock of Western storytelling. Our tale opens not with the clash of spears, but with joy for marriage of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph of unearthly beauty. It was a rare union between man and goddess, and all the Olympian deities gathered in glittering splendor to celebrate. All, that is but one, Eris, goddess of discord. Spurned and furious, she appeared anyway, bearing a gifter golden apple, inscribed with 3 ominous words, "To the fairest." The moment the apple rolled across the banquet table, joy dissolved into rivalry. Hera, queen of the gods, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, and Aphrodite, goddess of love, its laid claim to the prize. Zeus, ever cautious, refused to judge. Instead, he appointed a mortal Paris, a shepherd prince of Troy. Paris, once abandoned at birth due to a dire prophecy, had grown up in obscurity. Now he would decide which goddess was the fairest, and the fate of nations hung on his answer. Each goddess tempted him with divine gifts. Hera promised power, Athena promised glory, and Aphrodite offered love. The love of the world's most beautiful woman, Helen of Sparta. Paris chose Aphrodite. That single decision, whispered on a lonely mountainside, would doom empires. Hera and Athena departed in fury. Aphrodite, delighted, reminded Paris of her promisand. The woman she had promised was already wed to King Menelaus of Sparta. When Paris arrived in Sparta, under the guise of diplomacy, Helen's heart, or perhaps her will, clouded by divine enchantment, turned to him. Together, they fled to Troy, taking with them treasures and one very broken oath of hospitality. Menelaus, returning to find his wife and honor stolen, called upon his brother, Agamemnon, High King of Mycenae, upon every Greek lord who had once sworn an oath to protect Helen's marriage. They answered, kings, princes, warriors, the greatest generation Greece had ever known, all gathered, bound by oath and ambition. Among them were Diomedes of Argos, Ajax, the great of Salamis, cunning Odysseus, of Ithaca, and Nestor of Pylos the wise. Yet, one name outshone them all, Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, hidden away to avoid this very war. But he was found, and he came with his invincible myrmidons, drawn not by duty, but by destiny. Before the fleet could sail, the gods demanded a terrible price. The winds refused to blow, and a seer named Calchas declared that Artemis was angered. Agamemnon had once slain a sacred deer. Only the sacrifice of his daughter, Iphigenia, would appease her. Desperate, Agamemnon summoned his wife Clytemnestra and daughter to Aulis, under the false pretense of a wedding between Iphigenia and Achilles. When the truth was revealed, chaos erupted. Some said Iphigenia accepted her fate with dignity. Others claimed Artemis rescued her at the last moment. Whatever the truth, the winds rose and the 1,000 ships departed as they crossed the wind-dark sea. The Greek fleet stretched from horizon to horizon. The waves shimmered beneath the sun, and the air was filled with the creaking of timber, the shouts of oarsmen, and the songs of soldiers who dreamed of glory. But their landing would be soaked in blood. Patroclus, the first to leap ashore, was also the first to fall, fulfilling a grim prophecy. Troy's beaches were not empty, and archers waited in the cliffs. The Greeks battled their way inland and established a fortified encampment along the coast. It was clear this war would not end swiftly. Still, diplomacy was attempted. Odysseus and Menelaus, bearing olive branches, stood before King Priam and requested Helen's return. The halls of Troy listened. Helen stood silent. Priam, torn between hospitality and family, deferred to Paris, who refused. The gods had promised Helen, and he would not return her. War began in earnest. Troy, behind its colossal walls, stood strong. Built by the gods themselves, the city was nearly impregnable. The Greeks, unable to breach it directly, turned to raids. Achilles led the charge's wrath, skill, and divine lineage making him nearly unstoppable. City after city fell to him. His Myrmidons fought with unmatched discipline and ferocity. Among the spoils was Briseis, a noblewoman taken captive. She would become central to a coming conflict. The war dragged on for 9 years. Skirmishes filled the plains. Great duels were fought, and alliances made and broken. The gods walked among men, sometimes seen, more often unseen. Their whims steering the tides of war. Hector, Prince of Troy and elder brother of Paris, emerged as the city's greatest hope. A true warrior, honorable and devoted to his family, he led Trojan forces with courage and wisdom. His presence on the battlefield inspired his men and terrified the Greeks. Paris, though blamed by many for starting the war, remained mostly in the shadows, more lover than fighter. And Helen, caught between two worlds, walked Troy's halls like a ghost. Some adored her, others whispered curses. She watched from the walls as men died in her name. As the 10th year dawned, fate stirred anew. A plague struck the Greek camp. Calchas declared that Apollo, god of the sun and plague, was angry Agamemnon had taken Chryses, daughter of a priest. Forced to return her, the High King seethed. To show his power, he took Briseis from Achilles in compensation. It was a fatal mistake. Achilles, furious at the insult, withdrew from the war. His tent became a place of silence and seething wrath. Without him, the Greek lines faltered. The Trojans surged forward. Hector led a night assault that nearly burned the Greek ships. Panic rippled through the camp. Seeing disaster at hand, Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, begged for permission to fight. Achilles relented, allowing Patroclus to wear his armor and lead the Myrmidons. The Trojans, believing Achilles had returned, retreated in fear. But Patroclus, caught in the thrill of battle, pushed too far. He reached the walls of Troy. There, Apollo struck him down, stripping his armor. Euphorbus wounded him. Then Hector, unaware of the warrior's true identity, delivered the fatal blow. Word reached Achilles, and grief consumed him. He howled to the heavens, smeared ash on his face, and refused food or comfort. Thetis, his mother, rose from the sea, and brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus himself. With a shield that depicted the world, Achilles returned to the fight. What followed was not battle, but slaughter. Achilles rampaged across the field. No Trojan could stand before him. Even the river Scamander, swollen with the blood of the dead, rose to stop him, but Hephaestus scorched the waters back at last. Achilles confronted Hector. The Trojan prince stood his ground, though fear tugged at him. 3 times they circled the city. At last, tricked by Athena, Hector turned to fight. Their duel was swift. Achilles drove his spear through Hector's neck. As the dying man begged for his body to be returned, Achilles refused. He tied the corpse to his chariot and dragged it around the city walls. The gods were outraged. Zeus commanded Achilles to relent. That night, guided by Hermes, King Priam crept into the Greek camp. He knelt before Achilles, kissed the hands that had killed his son, and begged for Hector's body. Achilles wept. He saw his own father in the old man's face. Grief met grief, and for a moment, the war paused. Achilles returned Hector's body. A 12-day truce was declared. In Troy, bonfires burned, smoke rising into the sky as the city mourned its prince. And on the shore, Achilles stood alone, watching the waves. He had avenged Patroclus, but he knew his own death was near. Part 2. The Ashes and the Odysseyette. Not all who returned were greeted by joy. When Teucer, half-brother of Ajax, returned to Salamis, he was met with contempt. His father, Telamon, cursed him for not bringing Ajax's body home. Banished, Teucer wandered the coasts and founded a new city, Salamis, in Cyprus. There he built shrines not only to the gods, but to his fallen brother. His exile echoed the fate of many, to rebuild far from the lands they had bled for. Epeus, the builder of the wooden horse, found no welcome either. Though his cunning had ended the war, few sang of his name. He too sailed east and faded into obscurity. So many of the war's makers found that peace had no place for them. Aeneas, still carrying the Penaetes' household, gods journeyed through Thrace, Crete, Sicily, and Carthage. Each stop became a trial. In Thrace, he discovered the murdered remains of his ally Polydorus, buried in a grove. In Crete, a false oracle led him astray. In Sicily, he lost his father Anchises, whose funeral games would be celebrated for centuries. In Carthage, Dido's love for Aeneas was not mere romance, but a collision of destinies. She offered him a throne, a kingdom, her heart. He offered only the silence of duty. When he sailed away, her pyre rose into the sky, cursing him and all his descendants. And so, the seeds of Rome and Carthage's bitter future were sown not in war, but in heartbreak. Even in the realm of the gods, all was not peace. Poseidon still bore grudges. Athena turned cold and distant. Hera's anger lingered, her plans continuing far into the lineages of mortal kings. The divine realm had been shaken, fractured by the very war they had helped ignite. Meanwhile, Helen aged but was untouched by time in the hearts of poets. She became more symbol than woman. Some say she was never in Troy at all, but a phantom crafted by the gods. Others claimed she fled to Egypt, where she was worshipped as a goddess. In the mountains of Epirus Andromache raised Molossus, the child of Neoptolemus, and watched her memories fade into his young eyes. Neoptolemus himself became more brutal in peace than he had been in war. Eventually, he was slain at Delphi, struck down in Apollo's temple. Perhaps for his crimes during Troy's sack, Odysseus's return to Ithaca did not end his story. According to later myths, he left again, this time not by force, but by prophecy. Tiresias had told him to journey inland, where people knew nothing of the sea. There, when someone mistook his oar for a winnowing fan, he was to plant the oar and make sacrifice to Poseidon. Only then would his trials truly end. In one version, he reached that place. In another, he wandered endlessly, seeking the peace he never found. The world they returned to had changed. In the ruins of Thebes, civil war bloomed again. In Sparta, Menelaus ruled in uneasy silence. In Mycenae, the house of Atreus unraveled. Orestes, son of Agamemnon, would murder his mother Clytemnestra to avenge his father and be haunted by the Furies. This vengeance, cycle blood for blood, sin for sin, reflected the deep trauma the war had carved into Greek society. No one emerged clean. Even victors bore the stains of their choices. In the decades that followed, cities crumbled under their own curses. Mycenae fell. Troy's conquerors scattered. The Greek world entered a dark age, where memory gave way to myth, and myth hardened into epic. Yet in every firelit hall, old men whispered stories of the war. Children recited the names of heroes as if they were gods. The Iliad and Odyssey became scripture, not of religion, but of human experience. Why did they return to these tales? Because Troy was not just a place, it was the price of rage, it was the face of love, it was the voice of prophecy, it was the shadow of empire, it was the spark of tragedy, it was the echo that made them feel immortal.